Rudy Giuliani saying, first, there is no campaign violation. The payment was made to resolve a personal and false allegation in order to protect the president's family. It would have been done in any event, whether he was a candidate or not. Also saying the reference to timing were not describing my understanding of the president's knowledge, but instead my understanding of these matters. No doubt Dana Perino will have a lot more on this. The Daily Briefing starts right now.
Fox News Alert, Vice President Pence at the podium right now while we await President Trump's speech to the NRA convention in Dallas as he again steps into the national debate over gun rights. Hello, everyone. I'm Dana Perino, and this is the Daily Briefing. All this amid new fallout from Rudy Giuliani's revelation that the president reimbursed his personal lawyer for payments to adult film actress Stormy Daniels. And as Melissa Francis just told you, we have new information. And thankfully, we have White House correspondent Kevin Corke, who is live in Dallas. And Kevin, I don't know if you've just had a chance to read this statement. It's not very fulsome or detailed. What's your take on it?
You listen, I think you hit the nail on the head in this particular circumstance. The problem for the mayor is he gets a little loose in the turn, to use an old NASCAR expression. Sometimes he'll say something but then have to back it up with more granular detail. In this particular instance, Dana, I think it's fair to say that even if he is technically correct, it certainly was a terrible look for the White House. And again, this is what happens when you have a lot of surrogates out there, and some of whom are used to being in the media, get very comfortable in the media, but sometimes don't have the message discipline that you need to have. And in the case of the mayor, this will probably get worse before it gets better. Meantime, as you point out, we're here in Dallas, Texas. A beautiful event center here. This convention center is just spectacular as we await the president of the United States. As you've been watching, the vice president has already been up and talking about not just the need for this organization. For so many Americans, this is more than just a lobbying group or a weekend warrior activity for a great many Americans. This is a fundamental part of being an American in many parts of this country, and in particular here in the great Lone Star State of Texas. He's also talking about freedom and the Constitution and, the value of this organization. He, by the way, he just mentioned, Dana, that he is, in fact, a card-carrying member of the NRA. If you didn't know that, now you do. We continue to await the president. We expect him to hit again, Dana, on themes about the Constitution, freedom, again, the value of the Second Amendment. But I'm going to be listening very carefully, and I'm sure you will be too, to see if, Dana, he talks about a little pushback on this organization. You remember after the shooting in Parkland, he said, I'm not afraid to push back. I'm not beholden to them. We'll see if maybe he tweaks them a bit. But certainly we have a great crowd here, standing room only for the most part in this arena. Should make for a very interesting afternoon. Dana, back to you.
All right, Kevin Corke, thank you so much. President Trump earlier today walking back comments that Rudy Giuliani made this week, saying that the president knew about a payment by Michael Cohen to adult film actress Stormy Daniels. Watch.
Rudy knows it's a witch hunt. He started yesterday. He'll get his facts straight.
As a federal judge questioned lawyers from Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller's office about their motives in the case against former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort, the judge commenting, "Come on, man," and accusing them of lying during a hearing on a motion to dismiss the charges on the basis that they have nothing to do with Trump or the 2016 presidential election. I'm joined now by Bob Driscoll. He's a former Deputy Assistant Attorney General. I'm glad you're here today to help us sort this out. Let's first talk about the statement that Rudy Giuliani just put out. The president alluded to it this morning. He said, look, Rudy's just new on the job. He's going to get his facts straight, and you're going to hear from him soon. The statement that came out from Rudy Giuliani basically walks back two of the big news items. The first being that that they knew about this ahead of the campaign, and it was paid in order to make sure it didn't come out right before the election. And the second one regarding what the president knew about it. Now Rudy Giuliani saying that's not describing what the president knew. It's just describing his understanding of these matters. I think in the court of public opinion, there's enough confusion to maybe call this a wash. But does this matter in the court of law?
It does, Dana. I think that this is why, to defend kind of no-fun lawyers such as myself for a little bit, this is why lawyers are cautious, and this is why the president's lawyers advise against this kind of freewheeling that Giuliani is doing or did last night, and that the president occasionally does on Twitter and elsewhere. is that, you go out and you make statements, and if you don't have full command of everything and haven't thought through the ramifications of what you're saying, sometimes you're solving an immediate problem and creating problems down the road. And so it seems here like it just, at least if the reporting I read today is correct, the president and former Mayor Giuliani, got together and discussed this. They were trying to get the campaign finance issue off the table, and Giuliani went, I guess, a little too far in terms of some of his factual statements. And it's just not a good look, and it furthers, undermines the president's credibility a little bit. And these kind of things can come up on the periphery of the investigation, just in terms of showing a willingness to kind of say whatever is needed to get out of the immediate situation.
So I guess the other thing I would ask you is that Stormy Daniels' attorney, Michael Avenatti, we know that he's an aggressive lawyer, if not also just very available to the news media. Right. But I would wonder, then when he goes into court and he's asking a judge to rule a certain way, would he be using the original comments that Rudy Giuliani made, or I guess would he try to basically try to move things forward based on this new statement that's pretty vague?
Well, he'll use both. I mean, for someone in his position, the first hurdle for him is to take discovery. I mean, his goal is to take the deposition, I'm sure, of the President of the United States and take the deposition of key players. And by virtue of the fact there's been contradictory public statements by the President's representatives, he's going to tell the judge, look, they don't even have their own story straight. I need to take the testimony from various people and find out what actually happened and establish the timeline, and we can't take anything they say at face value. So he'll be making hay. I mean, he's obviously been very effective at keeping the story going and keeping it on the news, but this will further just aid him in his goal of doing that.
Bob, on another topic, separate from the Stormy Daniels thing, is the Mueller investigation. There was a hearing today, and federal judge T.S. Ellis III, are you familiar with him?
I know who he is. Okay,
so I'm just curious because apparently this is a Reagan appointee who is pretty tough on the lawyers who are in the courtroom and said today to Mueller's team that he was skeptical, to say the least, basically using, come on, man, like, what are you really doing here? This might not be what you're really here meant to be doing. What do you read into this based on his type of rulings?
Well, again, there wasn't any ruling today. This is all just comments from the bench. And in any kind of these preliminary hearings, particularly in a high-profile case, I think there's sometimes where the judge just wants to make clear to both parties, the government and the defendant, that the judge is the one that's in control. And simply because they argue something doesn't mean he necessarily buys it. It doesn't mean that he'll rule. I mean, there already was a ruling in D.C. where Manafort essentially made this argument in a separate lawsuit that Mueller was beyond the scope of the special counsel orders he received, and that was denied. And so we'll see what happens in Virginia. I wouldn't read too much. I mean, in preliminary hearings in particular, judges sometimes are just sending a message, kind of throwing a brushback pitch, to use the sports analogy. And
I'm very good at those. Yeah, keep at it. Bob, let me ask you one other thing, though. I want you to listen to President Trump earlier. He was talking about whether he should or should not sit down and do an interview with Bob Mueller's team. Watch.
All right.
I would love to speak, but I have to find that we're going to be treated fairly. Wait. I have to find that we're going to be treated fairly because everybody sees it now, and it is a pure witch hunt. Right now, it's a pure witch hunt. If I thought it was fair, I would override my lawyers.
Okay, so I know that most lawyers, I don't know if you're in this camp, say that they would advise the president not to sit down with Bob Mueller. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I understand that advice, and I think in any normal circumstances, clearly the advice is not talking is better than talking. You want to limit the number of statements your client has, particularly if your client is, like President Trump, kind of someone who has a hard time with focus occasionally in detail. But, when you're the President of the United States, the considerations go beyond the legal. Everyone needs to remember, impeachment is the name of the end game for the Democrats here. Presidents generally, can't be indicted while they're in office, and so an impeachment's a political proceeding. And so, there could be bad consequences of him talking, but there's also bad consequences politically of not talking, in that the Supreme Court would have to resolve what Mueller's authority is, and you'd be looking at 12 to 18 months of litigation, of this hanging out over the the presidency through, almost up till re-election. So, really, the president's going to weigh all of that. I mean, I think clearly legally, if I'm his lawyer, I sleep better at night if he's not going to talk to Mueller than if he does. But there's bigger considerations too.
I know there's not a time frame on when Mueller has to decide whether to issue a report or what he's going to do with indictments, whatever he's going to do. But there is. I feel like, the country is becoming pretty impatient. The president's impatient for this to be done. Do you have any sense, based on your experience at the Justice Department, as to the state of the investigation right now and when it might conclude?
It's hard to know because these are kind of unique cases, but I think the fact that in March these questions were transmitted, I guess, orally, and the president's lawyers wrote them down, means that by March, at least, Mueller's office was in a position, they thought, to begin negotiating terms to interview the president. They generally wouldn't do that until they had everyone else's statements in and lined up, and they had a pretty good factual background as to what was happening. And so, I know people have said this is close to the end a lot, but, if they're talking about interviewing the president, that would generally be one of the last pieces of the puzzle, absent them getting some new information.
All right, and while I have you here, I just want to go back to the Rudy Giuliani statement that he just put out. The president said he was going to clarify things, and he did just put this out. Let me read this to everybody here, and then get your take on it one more time before we hear the president at the NRA. Rudy Giuliani saying, first, there is no campaign violation. The payment was made to resolve a personal and false allegation in order to protect the president's family. It would have been done in any event, whether he was a candidate or not. Second, my references to timing were not describing my understanding of the president's knowledge, but instead my understanding of these matters. Third, it is undisputed that the president's dismissal of former Director Comey, an inferior executive officer, was clearly within his Article 2 power. Recent revelations about former Director Comey further confirm the wisdom of the president's decision, which was plainly in the best interests of our nation. Bob, let me zero in on that third point there. It is true. If you are a political appointee that works for the president of the United States, I used to say, I could get fired by the way I said good morning. It doesn't matter. That is absolutely true. The president has the right to do that. But is the issue then the evolving and changing explanations as to why Director Comey was fired, or does that not matter?
Well, I think the president's lawyers are going to be in a position of arguing it doesn't matter. I think as a constitutional issue, you can take, and I think with some support, that the president can fire any of his subordinate officials for any reason or no reason, and merely looking at the reasons the president did it is an infringement on the executive prerogative. I think that's probably where they'll start on a legal negotiation. The problem with and clearly Giuliani is walking back his prior statement that he fired Comey for not saying he was under investigation, is that, the alternative theory would be you can have a legal right to do something, but if you do it with a corrupt motive, then can that be obstruction of justice, even though it was otherwise legal? And I don't buy that legally, but it is a legitimate issue that would be litigated. And so if you're his lawyers, you want to protect on both those fronts. And I think that, again, that's an example of former Mayor Giuliani kind of speaking out of turn a little bit. And making false statements to the public is also, can come into this. Remember, Clinton got in hot water for his statement to the cabinet members where he lied to them and sent them out on his behalf to say that the affair never happened. And so I think that, this is the kind of thing that they're trying to avoid and why they're walking back Mayor Giuliani's statement.
That's right. Well, a lot of news. And Bob Driscoll, we are thankful that you were here today for us. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
President Trump is about to take the stage at the NRA convention in Dallas. Our panel on that is up next. The president's speech, that's just moments away, and we will bring that to you live. For the moment, let's bring in Igor Valsky. He's vice president of the Center for American Progress and co-host of Thinking Cap podcast, and Larry Keane with the National Shooting Sports Foundation. Gentlemen, I'm glad that you could join me. And as soon as the president starts, of course, we're going to go to him. But in the meantime, I'd love to get your thoughts on where things stand right now. Take a look at this poll from Gallup showing just evolving thinking on behalf of the American people on gun laws from December of 2012, with 58% of the public saying they would like to see more strict gun laws, to fast forward to today, March of 2018, that's up to 67%. And I'm curious, let me just start with you, Larry, if you get the sense that this is a sustainable and growing concern with the American people, or does it sort of fade as the news gets behind us a little bit?
Well, what we see typically is a spike in support for gun control generically without really defining what you're talking about. And then over time, that dissipates and wanes. And support for the Second Amendment continues to grow over time, as we've seen in polling. So, I mean, I think it's a momentary blip. I mean, when you ask people what they mean by gun control and you start explaining what the laws really are, support for things wane because the laws are very strict and it is very regulated.
Yeah, and of course, one of the frustrations that people had, Igor, I'll put this to you, is that there are laws on the books, but in the recent cases, the processes weren't followed, and that resulted in, you know, at least in, of course, in Parkland, in Florida, 17 students losing their lives. What is your take on the public mood on this right now?
Well, you know, 75% of guns used in mass shootings are actually purchased legally, so there's a problem with the laws. And I think that's what the American people are really pointing to. And what the NRA is facing now, Dana, is really a generational problem, because you have young people all across the country waking up to the horrors of the NRA's guns everywhere and for everyone agenda, and they're organizing around it, they're registering people to vote, and they're really threatening the NRA's power. And that's a big problem for them. That's why I think having Trump there and Pence there in Dallas today is a bit of a desperate move for them.
Although, Larry, it does seem, I've seen polling that shows that the fundraising for the NRA has gone up, the membership has gone up, and yet I look at this Marist poll that just ran that says that asking the question, do you think stricter gun legislation should be an immediate priority for the current Congress? And an immediate priority, 51% of people say that. Now, that might be just because people say Congress should be doing something, since they aren't doing much at all. Tell me a little bit about any of the possible fixes. For example, Senator Cornyn has a bill to deal with the background check issue. Is that going to go anywhere this year?
Well, actually, Senator Cornyn's bill, the Fix NICS Act, is named after a program of the National Shooting Sports Foundation, and that actually has already been signed into law. And we're very proud of the fact that the bill was named after our program, where the industry has gone around the country and gotten the law changed in 16 states so that the records of disqualified individuals, primarily mental health records that are not in the system, are put into the NICS system so that individuals who shouldn't be able to purchase firearms are unable to do that. And the quintessential example of why this matters is the tragedy that happened in Sutherland Springs, Texas, where the individual was able to pass background checks repeatedly because the Air Force failed to put the records into the system. Had they done their job, he would not have been able to purchase those firearms. And so we're very proud of that. We've increased the records in the NICS system by 200% in just a couple of years. So there is common ground. There are things that we can all agree upon. Nobody wants to see dangerously mentally disturbed individuals obtain firearms, and so that's why the Fix NICS Act, which had broad, overwhelming bipartisan support, 78 co-sponsors. There were actually more Democrats supporting the bill when it passed than there were Republicans.
Igor, we have a minute left before a break, and I'm going to hold you over, though, if you can watch the speech with me. Is that something that you support, then? The strengthening of background checks, does that seem to be something of a bipartisan agreement in this big, serious debate?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good place to start, but we need to go further than that. You know, it's not enough just to confine guns in the hands of so-called responsible people. We have 310 million guns in circulation, and until we start figuring out how do we go after some of the guns themselves, we're going to continue having this problem.
All right, Igor and Larry, if you can stick around, we'll be back as soon as the president finishes speaking. President Trump about to address the National Rifle Association in Dallas, Texas. You're watching the Vice President Right Annual Meeting. We'll bring in that to you live. And in the meantime, I want to talk to Noah Rothman. He's an associate editor at Commentary Magazine. Noah, while we wait for the president to talk about gun control and whatever else he might announce, the North Korea summit is on the minds of everyone, and we've been told to watch this speech for possible news. I don't know if the president will do it here, but he said this morning that a time and a location has been chosen for this meeting. This has happened at record speed.
Yeah, everything is moving quite fast, and the big scuttlebutt, I suppose, yesterday was the extent to which North Korea is prepared to move towards us in the form of some sort of concrete confidence-building measures, and we are awaiting the release of some American hostages as some movement in our direction. They said they were going to close down this nuclear test site, but it's probably inoperative, so I'm not looking for that as some sort of a concrete movement. The hostages would be something, although I'm not going to be dancing in the streets at the release of American hostages. That's why you take hostages, in order to create some sort of an impression that you are moving in the direction of your captors when you've given up absolutely nothing. So I want to see something a little more concrete. And then we had yesterday John Bolton sort of acting very perturbed at the notion that Donald Trump was entertaining the idea that we would remove American troops from the Korean Peninsula. That's certainly anathema to John Bolton, but I don't know if it's anathema to Donald Trump.
Well, there was a report that says that the president had asked the Pentagon for some plans to draw down troops in South Korea, and then John Bolton did push back on that New York Times report, saying that is not true. The president, though, this morning did say, we spent a lot of money there. We have 32,000 troops, but he didn't say we're going to pull all of the troops out. But certainly, when you get to that definition of denuclearization, it means different things to different people. And I think that the Chinese and the North Koreans wouldn't be sad to see the United States go.
Consistently, North Korea has interpreted the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula to mean the withdrawal of American forces totally from the Korean Peninsula, because the United States has nuclearized the Korean Peninsula in the eyes of the North Koreans. That definition to them probably still pertains. And when Donald Trump brings up the notion of removing troops from the Korean Peninsula, it has to do with Korea, South Korea, and trade. As recently as March, and before an audience of like minds at a campaign-style rally, he entertained the notion that American soldiers might be on the table in negotiations with South Korea regarding trade. So he's not necessarily predisposed to say American soldiers are a permanent fixture in the Korean Peninsula.
Right. We're waiting for the president to speak to the NRA. He'll be here just momentarily. The other thing that happened today, while all of this other news is going on, is the president's delegation went to China to talk about trade. And they're apparently leaving without announcing a deal or progress. But maybe there was progress. They haven't really announced anything yet. And the question has been, well, then what will actually happen on that front? Because there's a lot of different organizations, companies, other countries, allies, enemies wondering what are we going to do on this trade deal, because the NAFTA deal is right behind it.
Right. So we just pushed back for another 30 days, I believe, the imposition of tariffs on American allies in Europe. China is apparently playing hardball on their own. They've decided we're not going to buy any more American soybeans. That hurts. That hurts a lot in the Midwest, particularly among soybean producers over there. So this is what you call a trade war. This is the.
You think we're actually in a trade war?
Well, I mean, very sort of low impact trade war, but these are hostilities, and we're talking about coercive signaling here in the form of actually imposing costs on the United States American producers, just as we are imposing costs on Chinese producers, on European producers. That is the definition of a trade war. Now, it's sort of low scale at this point, but that doesn't mean it can't intensify.
I'm going to ask you something about something that you wrote about. We're talking here about the president going to the NRA annual convention. You wrote a piece this week saying that liberals are quite depressed. Is gun control one of those issues, the Second Amendment one, that the Democrats feel like they have a good persuasive argument, but yet at the polls they continue to fall short of their goals?
Well, sort of everybody's depressed, and it's one of the most fascinating political phenomena that I think I've witnessed in my small period of time doing this professionally. Everybody, both sides of the aisle, believe they're losing, believe they're sacrificing ground to their opponents, and there's a lot of evidence to suggest that is not true. It's a construct that has been developed and promulgated by politicians, by members of the pundit class, but it is, I believe, unfounded. It's the subject of a piece that I wrote for the cover article on Commentary Magazine this month, which I hope everybody checks out. But it is really a fascinating phenomenon, the extent to which the public who are politically engaged have been convinced of their futility, the futility of political engagement, because they believe that what they need to do in politics to move the needle forward is outside the political realm. It's beyond legislation. It's beyond tactics, and it needs to be something much more significant, substantial in the streets. I think that's a form of corruption, frankly. I don't think it's tethered to reality, but it's absolutely axiomatic that Republican activists, Democratic activists, liberal conservative activists believe that the other side is winning and they are losing.
Noah Rothman, that might be the first time anyone has used axiomatic on this show, and I credit you with that. Thank you for being here, Noah Rothman.
Pleasure.
President Trump is about to address the National Rifle Association. That's a convention that they're having this year in Dallas, Texas, and we'll have his remarks live.
Then, none of that information has to do with information related to the Russian government coordination and the campaign of Donald Trump. It doesn't have anything to do. It's from years before. Then, how does this have anything to do with the campaign, the judge asks. Let me tell you, folks, we're all fighting battles, but I love fighting these battles. It's really a disgrace. What's happening to our country is a disgrace. Thank you. Thank you. Can you imagine if we ever called for a rally in Washington, D.C.? There wouldn't be enough room. There wouldn't be enough room. We have a lot of love going on. You know, people don't realize we have great love going on in this country. Great love. It's right here. We have, and by the way, you just saw the recent poll. It came out, the Rasmussen, 51 or 52. It's the highest level I've ever been at. How does that happen when you only get bad publicity? How does that happen? That's because people realize that a lot of what you read and a lot of what you see on television is fake. They realize it. The people are smart. The people are smart. So you have a battle also. You have a battle to keep your rights, and we're going to keep those rights. You're going to be so happy. You have to say, you weren't sure that Trump was going to win, but you all went out there. You all went out there and you voted. You voted. And there were times that put up that Trump, Pence. There were times you'd say, geez, a week before they were saying, I remember they came out with a lot of phony polls. You know what that's called? Suppression. They convince you that you're wasting your time. Why should you vote? Go to a movie instead, come home, watch the results. Very few of the people in this room and in this country did that. And we really had a big night. Remember they said, there's no way, Electoral College, there's no way to 270 for me. There is no way to 270. And they were right. But 306 was okay, right? So we had a great time, and I think we're doing better now than ever before. I think we're more popular now from the standpoint, now we've produced. You know, when I was running, I said we're going to give you tax cuts. And by the way, we are decimating Obamacare. We got a bad vote the evening. We got a bad vote the evening that we were going to terminate Obamacare. We got a bad vote. You know about that, right? That was not a nice thing. That was an unexpected vote. But if you look at the massive tax cut bill, we also got rid of the individual mandate, which is the worst part of Obamacare, right? I don't know if the people in Texas are going to like this, but we also got ANWR in Alaska, so I don't know if you're going to like a little competition. But you know what it is? It's called energy for this country. It's called energy. That we like. So, Ted, I think they're happy with that, I think, right? So, we've delivered. And when we were running, I would say, we're going to this, we're going to that, we're going to that. A certain person that's not a very fair person in the media said, I have to say, Trump has actually delivered more than he promised, which is probably the first time people have ever heard that statement. We've actually delivered more than we promised. And let me just tell you this, we're really doing well with North Korea. We're really doing well. Okay? Right? Remember they said, oh, it's going to be terrible. They were actually saying 3 months ago when the rhetoric was rather sharp. Do we agree? I won't use the rhetoric now. Now I'm trying to calm it down a little bit. So I'm not going to use the rhetoric. But let's put it, he goes to use it. I know you come from Texas, whoever the hell you are. Look, for years they've had this problem. And everybody has said sort of, oh, don't talk. Please don't talk. The last administration had a policy of silence. Don't talk. You may make them and him angry. Don't talk. If a horrible statement is made about the United States, don't say anything. We have no comment. Please, please. Oh, my God. Same thing with Iran. Remember? We're signing that horrible deal, and they're marching in the streets saying death to America. I said, who signs a deal when they're marching saying death to America? Who marches? They're saying death to America, and we have the former administration as represented by John Kerry. Not the best negotiator we've ever seen. He never walked away from the table, except to be in that bicycle race where he fell and broke his leg. That's it. That was the only time. I said, don't tell him you broke your leg. Just stay inside. Say you don't want to negotiate. You'll make a much better deal. But he broke his leg. And I learned from that. At 73 years old, you never go into a bicycle race, okay? Just don't. You just don't do that. I'm not 73, he was, okay? But I'll be there. But we have great things going on. And, you know, with respect to North Korea, remember how strong it was, and they were saying, this is going to be nuclear war. We're going to have it. No. You know what gets you nuclear war? Weakness gets you nuclear war. Being weak gets you nuclear war. That's what gets you nuclear war. So let's talk about guns, shall we? Paris, France has the toughest gun laws in the world. The president just left Washington. Emmanuel, great guy. Nobody has guns in Paris, nobody. And we all remember more than 130 people, plus tremendous numbers of people that were horribly, horribly wounded. You notice nobody ever talks about them. They talk about the people that died, but they never mention that 250 people had horrible, horrible wounds. I mean, they never mentioned that. But they died in a restaurant and various other close proximity places. They were brutally killed by a small group of terrorists that had guns. They took their time and gunned them down one by one. Boom, come over here. Boom, come over here. Boom. If you were in those rooms, one of those people and the survivors said it just lasted forever. But if one employee or just one patron had a gun, or if one person in this room had been there with a gun aimed at the opposite direction, the terrorists would have fled or been shot, and it would have been a whole different story. I mean, right?